right. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Swan, a partner at Tercera. Before I introduce Chris and Jeff, who probably need no introduction, I just want to say thanks for joining. Not to sound too much like a flight attendant or anything, but we know you have a choice of virtual events, and we're happy to have you here for the next 30 minutes. Probably go a little 45 minutes if we have lots of questions towards the end. But like I said, I'll be sending this out as a recording afterwards, so you can see the questions there. So with that, I want to introduce Chris. Chris is the CEO and founder of Tercera. A lot of folks on the call know him as the former CEO of Aperio, one of the first cloud consultancies. That's where him and Jeff actually met. Jeff's been covering the intersection of IT services and cloud for a long time, both kind of on the operations side at an IT services company called INS, and then as an analyst over the last few years. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Jeff, for joining me here. And thanks, everyone, for dialing into the virtual event. It's good to see familiar faces and appreciate the support. We're excited for the next 30 minutes to share some thoughts that we have that we've recently put in an ebook that Jeff has helped us with and has really driven. Before we dive into some of the meat and the concepts and frameworks we've put together, just a little bit of a kind of a 2-minute commercial on who is and what is Tercera. Tercera, Spanish for third wave of the cloud is what we're capitalizing on, what we're focused on. We're trying to create a unique investment and advisory firm. And I say it's unique in that, generally speaking, what I found in the last handful of years is there's a lot of capital in the market, and there's a lot of capital chasing software and more recently services firms, but there's not a lot of firms that have focused on balancing capital, connections, and what we call counsel. We think capital is the easy part, and providing really great advisory services and proper counsel and connections to help services firms scale is the unique intersection of what Tercera is trying to do. So capital, counsel, and connections focused on professional services that are driving and powering the third wave of the cloud. So as I said, we're releasing an ebook as part of this webinar. Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we got here?
Well, it's been very exciting to be a part of this and to be a part of Tercera's launch and initial activities in the marketplace. I've been a services guy for a long, long time. And as Michelle said, I've not only been following the industry, I've been a part of it. And what we've seen over the past 20 years with the cloud has been extraordinary. But we believe that there's going to be a lot of important changes happening over the years to come in the way in which services companies will really impact the implementation, utilization, and optimization of the cloud. And what we wanted to do in this ebook is to not only chart the path of the evolution of this marketplace, but describe the key ingredients that are going to make for successful leaders in this sector of the marketplace. So it's been a lot of fun to work on this project, and I'm looking forward to this discussion to talk about some of the things we found along the way.
Yeah, and I think what's been helpful in this ebook is kind of there's 3 anchor points that we needed to articulate. One is like just defining what is the third wave, and what is it not, and how is it different than waves 1 and 2. Secondly, who are the vendors, the software companies that are shaping the third wave itself, and what are the services that can be built around that. And then lastly, and what I probably am most passionate about, what are the characteristics of a services firm that will lead and drive this evolution from now for the next 10 plus years. At Aperio, where a number of you are from, and where our background is, our history is from, we were driving a level of, I'd say, pioneering and disruption in 2006. Well, guess what? A lot is different 15 years later, and will continue to be different over the next 10 years. So the first thing we had to do was define, well, what is this third wave? What are the elements of the next 10 years? What are they going to look like? And so Jeff helped us put some pretty good thought into this. So Jeff, I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about the this graphic here.
Yeah, and it's been fun because when you really step back and take a look at it, that first decade of the evolution of the marketplace was really about the software as a service sector, and companies like Salesforce coming to the fore, and a circle of consultancies surrounding Salesforce, helping to implement their application in a specific department, sales, marketing, front office kinds of things. There are other companies that emerged during that period of time, obviously, who had similar kinds of experiences. Focus on a single application, focus on a single department with a cadre of young entrepreneurial consultancies trying to help them basically implement that single application in a single department. But as we moved into the next wave, the wave that Imperio really emerged in, we were talking about taking multiple applications, integrating them together, building platforms on them and around them, even adding an infrastructure layer to them. And not only looking at individual departments, but looking at how we could extend that power and capability across the enterprise. Now, what's interesting is with each of those first waves, there was a catalyst. In the case of the first wave, we talk about the dot-com era, 9/11, unfortunately, that really shook things up and made people think about new ways of acquiring software and implementing that software. The second wave, of course, was sparked by the financial crisis, which really pushed a lot of enterprises to think about new ways of utilizing hardware and software functionality via the cloud to mostly save money, but also to accelerate the deployment of that functionality. And now, of course, with COVID, we've seen exponential growth in what's going on in the marketplace in terms of adoption, but also in terms of where it's being deployed. And that's basically everywhere, across industries, across applications. And the real challenge here is to maximize that connectedness rather, both inside the organization and outside, to both customers, partners, suppliers, and everybody else in between.
Yeah, I think this third wave, what's been interesting to me as we've dug in here is this, the inner enterprise connectedness piece, but how real time everything has gotten, the level of acceleration and the real time nature, and the demands that customers are putting on firms to compress cycle times, delivery, value add. And that was, to your point, Jeff, accelerated in large part by COVID. The need for firms to stay alive. Everyone was put on their heels, and their customers were put on their heels. It drove a level of acceleration, and we'll talk about this later, but this kind of accelerated digital transformation. It wasn't just about transformation and big bang, let's do a 10-year, guess what? We needed to survive. And so there was a collapsing and an acceleration of digital transformation that I think, has really shaken the industry in many ways, but has accelerated things in many ways too.
Yeah, and it served as a proof point that even putting these pieces in place quickly in a reactive measure proved to be relatively successful in those circumstances. And now the idea of hybrid offices, remote learning, telemedicine are becoming a norm that people don't want to leave behind now that COVID seems to be behind us. So now the question is, okay, so how do we put these pieces in place, fortify them, and really make them work in a transformational way?
That's right.
I think that's a good, actually, chance to move to this in terms of the new second, some of just the new applications and technologies that are in, just the sheer complexity of it too.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. We came up and we're thinking about Tercera and the concept of Tercera almost 18 months ago. We only formally launched or soft launched it in October of last year. So we've been kind of in the market for roughly 6 or 7 months. One of the interesting challenges was, well, who are the software firms that are going to shape this next 10 years? And obviously there's not just hundreds, there's thousands of firms to choose from that are, pioneering and focused in many different ways, really across these 5 categories from, hyperscaler, infrastructure, data, apps, and machine to machine. We have focused here, and we have this puzzle piece approach because how they fit together is a big part of what services companies need to do and sort out for their clients. But roughly speaking, we've come up with, it's about 36 firms. This will be iterative. These firms will change over time, but these 36 firms are really helping shape this next decade as we see it. The services opportunity around these firms is significant, but in many cases, their ecosystems are relatively immature. They're just getting started. And that's a big focus for Tercera, is to help partner up with these software companies, find the next generation boutique services firms, and help grow them and scale them alongside of these software companies. So while it's not an exclusive list, and frankly, some firms don't show up on here because they've been acquired by other firms, and it's very iterative just by way of how fast the market is moving. We believe these, call it 36 firms, really represent a huge opportunity for consultancies to build their practices, their businesses, and to again, get very much side by side with the software companies and their customers to scale things to the next level. And so, again, not an exclusive list, but for us, an exciting list that will throw off significant billions of dollars of services revenue, if not tens of billions, in the coming decade and beyond.
Chris, one of the things that we tried to bring out in this graphic is the fluidity of the marketplace. If you talked about the three key elements of the cloud a few years ago, it would have been very distinctly SaaS over here, infrastructure over there, and platforms somewhere in between. But as we know, some of the leading players are basically bridging the gap between those three tiers, if you will, of the cloud, and are playing in all three of them. And what is important for the new generation of consultancies is to figure out where they want to align themselves, but to be aware of the fluid nature of the marketplace, so they can anticipate how they have to evolve their own services to meet the needs of the customers. Because my view is that in today's world, a lot of enterprises are trying to in some ways capitalize on multiple vendors, but also focus in on strategic relationships, and those include the consultancies they work with, who they trust are going to be working with the best of breed within the cloud marketplace, so that they can again leverage those capabilities.
Right. I mean, when we came into, forming the business, one of the things we did was map these ecosystems.
Yep.
And the detailed mapping that we did, took, a couple of months, but we mapped, close to 10,000 services companies that are supporting this set of logos here. And you could argue, and there's a long tail. There's some that are very, very small, and there's some that are very, very large. But over 10,000 firms. We've talked now to about 250 of those firms. And we're pretty focused on, trying to best understand, how we think we can be helpful as a firm, but also what are the characteristics of firms that are going to be pioneers and thought leaders and, take an unfair market share. And each of these ISVs, they're looking for the leader, the one or two or three people that are going to push the likes of the Accentures and the Deloittes, the Caps of the world. And so, we're trying to figure out those characteristics, and we've kind of come up with kind of three different major types of characteristics. And, there's 10 dimensions that we're working through. And so maybe we can bat these around a little bit, and this might spur some questions from the audience. The first, and I'll start here, and then Jeff, throw it back to you, is what we're calling, the business values for these companies, or for a new workforce. And I like to describe these kind of three elements. Everyone talks about the remote workforce and virtual, and everyone's on Zoom and scaling. It's actually only one element. Equally as important, if not more important, in your business values are having a mission-driven culture. That continues to be really, really important for the types of people you can recruit and how you retain people. And then on top of it, just the priority, and what we're talking a lot to firms about, is just the diversity and inclusiveness of the workforce. This is not just having a diverse board. or leadership team, but in the DNA of the whole business. And so these kind of values, it's not just let's be remote, let's all be on Zoom. I do think that companies that are starting today that are 100% remote, they're going to have an interesting advantage over the big glass building type companies. But these three elements, I almost think of them as like multi-tenancy for services. These are the characteristics for a multi-tenant services company. Just like software has its multi-tenancy characteristics, I think these are the characteristics of a next generation consultancy. When you're really good at all three of these things, and they're very interrelated, you'll be able to scale and differentiate in a big way.
And Chris, somebody can look at those first three and say, well, those are nice to have, they're kind of motherhood and apple pie and all the rest. But again, putting it into the historic context of why we talk about the third wave being different than the previous waves, we're really talking about a much more competitive marketplace, not only for the firms as they're trying to compete for clients, but for these firms as they're trying to compete for good people to populate their organizations and to deliver those services. They're going to make them leaders in the marketplace. That first generation of consultancies, were kind of out there on their own because nobody even knew how to spell SaaS. Your generation with the Aperio obviously was facing greater competition, but not quite like what we see today. Because first of all, with the financial crisis, there wasn't as much money being thrown around, but also because the awareness of what the cloud can bring hadn't attracted as much attention as well. So, I think we shouldn't discount the importance of setting the tone with these business values that you were just describing as, basically the foundation of what makes a new cloud consultancy a real leader in the third wave that we're talking about today.
Yeah, I think the one thing I'd add is it's fascinating, and within 250 discussions that we've had, everyone leads with, we have a unique culture. Our culture is awesome. That's our differentiator. Guess what? Every conversation, they say the same.
Right.
I actually think having a great culture is not the standout differentiator. You need to have this intersection in this first row. You need to be thoughtful about it. And to your point, Jeff, when I ask the other question, what's your biggest challenge? Same answer every time. Finding and retaining great people. And so, just having a great culture is not going to do that for you. You need to be thoughtful about, these characteristics and, the ones we'll continue to talk about. But I do find that is a leading answer for everybody. In my opinion, it's not enough.
Yeah. And then it's how do you put that into action and build a structure around it? That's what this second grouping of go-to-market and delivery models is all about that we describe in the ebook. One of the things that you and I have talked a lot about is the previous generations, and even before the cloud, a lot of consultancies really chased one project after another. There was no real continuity in terms of their engagement models with their customers. And the first box here is all about that. How do you build a organizational structure and a service delivery model that ensures a continuous ongoing relationship and engagement with your clients, so you're not just chasing your tail after each and every project, trying to re-engage with the customer, trying to utilize, in fact, the best of technologies that have been born out of the cloud as the piece parts for how you actually deliver services yourself, when it comes to trying to ensure that your services are a representation of the kind of solutions you're trying to help your customers build within their own organizations. The other thing, you talked about long tail. There's no question that it's not about simple horizontal applications any longer. It's about applying this new generation of applications to meet the specific needs of individual industries. I refer to it as digitizing the Byzantine processes of specific industries that, for a long time were plagued by a lot of manual analog systems that need to be brought up to date. And in today's world, customers are demanding that be the case. So having domain expertise in a specific industry or series of industries is going to be increasingly important. How we establish and deliver solutions, and then on an ongoing basis help to manage the success of those solutions is really the third box. Too often, I believe, consultancies see themselves as, doing the high-end, thought, strategic leadership kinds of things, maybe doing some software development underneath that, and then moving on, looking for, some new form of transformation to occur that they can have an impact on. Well, a lot of customers want the consultancy to help on a day-to-day basis actually manage that new system that's been put in place, optimize its performance, ensure its success, even measure how it's impacting the organization. So I believe in what we've tried to describe in the ebook is a world in which there's going to be a coming together, a merging of the ideas of consulting and managed services in a way in which we can maximize the success of these solutions and ensure their ongoing relevance to the organization on a day-to-day basis. And then, how we apply these again to meet the needs of the organization as their world evolves. And this is where it's not only making sure your engagement models are there and have a stickiness to them, but you're also applying the latest and greatest in terms of business intelligence, AI, security capabilities to be able to, in a sense, look over the shoulder of your customer and help them to anticipate and plan for their next round of improvements and enhancements to their systems to ensure that they remain competitive in their own marketplaces.
Yeah, no, I think this area, for me, go-to-market and delivery, the differentiating in the delivery models is the toughest part. Doing that well, effectively in a next generation model, it's really hard. And I think that, Globant is one of these firms that I just have a tremendous amount of respect for. They're doing some really interesting things to automate kind of code productivity with artificial intelligence, kind of almost type ahead features where they're doing code repositories of a lot of their projects. So their ability to do tech-enabled services at a different level is actually driving valuation for them. They're trading at 10 times revenue. This is a public comp. So I think Endava, Globant, Global Logic was acquired for 8 times. There's some really interesting things to study in terms of next generation delivery models in those leaders that are public companies.
Yeah, you were really talking about not only having a clear idea about where your core competency is, where your specialization is, but how you scale that and create a repeatable business around that can be profitable in such a way that you can compete in an increasingly intense marketplace.
Yeah, just before we go to the next one, I think that targeted channel value add, that sounds so nebulous too. How is that, and it's something that we talk to a lot of companies about, that particular area. How is that different in the third wave than the first two?
Well, I'll take the first stab at that, and Chris, I'm sure you've got plenty to say as well there. One of the things, again, that's I think a central thesis of Tercera is that the leaders of today are going to be doing even more to ensure that they're well aligned with their strategic partners. But they're also going to be working more closely with their customers to determine what the value add is. That there's a value add in how they can deploy that strategic partner's solutions, but there's also a value add in the way in which they can manage that client relationship on an ongoing basis. So that there's a greater sense of a life cycle of services, there's a greater sense of an automation of those services, low touch, limited friction, and also a greater sense of insight being derived from those services that not only benefit the consultancy in the way in which they deliver their services, but ultimately, of course, ensure that the client is getting the best of the solution as well.
Why don't I hit the next gen skill set, the kind of the last bucket, because I do think that's relevant as well by way of how to stand out and differentiate in this third wave. I think some of the firms that we're talking to, they have a real focus on a specific technology, and we'll talk about our first couple of investments, one in the Okta space, one in the Twilio space. But some of the best firms, the individual consultants themselves have multi-cloud experience. It goes beyond just a single skill set. It can be in the firm, but it can be in a person. And that person at the consulting level, at the architect level, at the PM level, they're aware of the broader puzzle piece slide that we shared earlier, how it works together and how to optimize those technologies. And they're also aware about what's coming. What are the future technologies that are going to be important to that enterprise that they can bring to bear? If they're able to layer multi-cloud and disruptive skills with industry best practices, that's the trifecta. That's the kind of the unicorn consultant, if you will, or firm, is that you can bring together the multi-cloud, here's where things are going, and guess what? I can apply it to your industry and your business process. I do think that firms that are, while there's an encouragement to be broad, as you scale, you need to get a little bit more narrow and differentiate in some cases by industry. And so I think, to summarize this slide, and we'll talk about a few of our first investments, the scalability point is important. So when you're 5, 10, 15 million of revenue, you can't do all of these things at one time. You need to be able to be thoughtful about gearing and driving towards some of these characteristics. You need to pick a couple of spots where you're going to dive in and make sure you're great at them. You need to build towards them. But when you get to 50 million, 75 million, 100 million, these are when more of these become important. You can divide and conquer different leaders in your business. But what we're trying to articulate here is these are these are the characteristics that become important to scale and differentiate and stand out as a multi-$100 million business. But if you're a $5 to $10 million shop just getting going, hard to do them all. And that's, it speaks to kind of our first couple of investments. We've partnered up with 2 firms out of the gate. One in the Okta space, Beyond ID was our first investment. We announced it earlier this year. Arun is doing a great job. He came from Okta and their PS organization. So he has some really interesting insights on security, identity, zero trust. Roughly 100 or so folks today, but really driving to be a thought leader in zero trust, security, identity, alongside of Okta, which just did a big acquisition of Auth0. And so very, very excited about how we can help them drive those characteristics, drive through plateaus and scaling challenges of growth, but excited about Arun and team. And then, equally as excited about Tercera, which we just announced, was it, Michelle? Was that last week now? If I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And so this is in the Twilio space, doing really, really good work, roughly the same size of a company. And Mark and his team, Mark's a former CIO, very, very tied into, the needs of enterprise CIOs that are moving down kind of unified and cloud communications, software engineering, integration and data. And so our first 2 bets, one in the Okta space, one in the Twilio space, both software companies that are going through crazy growth spurts, both software companies that are going and moving into the enterprise, and both that have real significant needs in and around building their services ecosystems.
And Chris, there's an interesting observation you can add to this, which is that both of those companies are delivering services that span multiple environments across multiple platforms, across multiple clouds. And therefore, you've chosen firms which not only have a specialization, we'll call it, regarding those particular solutions, but they have to do it in the context of understanding how those solutions are solving a bigger problem.
That's right. I mean, if you look at, I think Okta published a report last week that said the average enterprise has 175 different applications that Okta is integrating. And so think about that as a services company, the opportunity to help an enterprise navigate that and do it in a secure way. It's a huge, Terrazzo, same thing in around Twilio, the number of applications it touches because it's a developer platform is significant. And, Terrazzo, one of the reasons we love Mark and team is they've got some really interesting integration chops because they have to tie these different systems together. But on top of that, ServiceNow has been a big driver of their services. While Twilio is the anchor, it does have to touch lots of other applications that fit into that new enterprise IT stack.
Yeah. And you think about Twilio, waving their banner around of APIs, right? It's all about the APIs. Well, in essence, the consultancies are the APIs. They are the ones who pull these pieces together and ensure that they interoperate on a day-to-day basis in a efficient and effective fashion.
Yeah. Well, that might be a good time to actually get rolling with some of the questions that we have here. So just as a reminder for everyone on the call, there's a little Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type in the questions there and we'll read them out. But we'll start with one from Leo Des. It says, at what point do you believe the IT stack picture, the puzzle piece slide picture, will include physical goods versus just virtual? Is that the fifth wave?
Jeez, Lee. I mean, it's a hard question. I mean, I like the fact that we're talking about the fifth wave already. I mean, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think when you say physical goods, I don't know if you mean hardware or something beyond hardware, but I mean, I think the intersection of hardware, software is already part of the consulting stack and the opportunity set that a lot of these firms are seeing. But I like the vision and the strategy. And if you want to help us, and join our advisory team, feel free.
This is more of a comment than an actual question, but someone just mentioned that when you're talking about the different traits, characteristics, that it's not just the domain knowledge and experience for some of those verticals, but it's also the sub expertise, like specific regulations, compliance, and some of those types of things as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think I like to always say lots of firms, when you go from kind of 10, 20, 30 million up to 100, you want to layer in industry and vertical expertise, but that's broad, too broad. And many firms do it in a very veneer oriented way. Let's put a salesperson that's got banking. Well, guess what? Banking and FinServ there's lots of sub verticals and there's lots of process. And the delivery chops are just as important as the sales chops. And so, it's easy to talk about it on a chiclet slide like this. It's very hard to implement and to do it well. And I think some of the bigger systems integrators, they are great at this because of years and years of expertise and frankly, armies of people and assets that they can bring to bear. Doing it as you scale a services company from 10, 20 million to 100, 200, 300. That's a hard challenge, and it becomes very specific very fast.
And it gets back to the 10 characteristics we were talking about, which is centered around being able to attract the talent, retain the talent, grow the talent, and build upon that talent a organizational delivery model that can scale it profitably in a highly competitive marketplace.
Yeah. Well, speaking of scale, this one actually is from another anonymous person. But you mentioned it's harder for early stage professional services firms that they can't do all those areas that you mentioned that they have to focus. Where would you recommend we focus among those key areas if you're under 5 million in revenue?
If you're under 5 million, I mean, one, I think it's important to pick your tech that you're going to really let's just say you're going to be in the, let's just use Okta. You pick, I guess some of these platforms, they have multiple areas. So pick your ISV and then pick an area within that ISV and be great at it. You may aspire to do more downstream, but I think, trying to be too broad, too fast. It's like if you said, I'm going to be a Salesforce partner. Salesforce as a stack is huge. You can't, it's hard to be a great Service Cloud, Sales Cloud, and MuleSoft, and Tableau, and Slack, like, and pick an area, be great at it. I'd say one. But if that, with that said, I think the values at the top, like really focusing on your values, being kind of mission driven, your core values, but also how you're going to build out your workforce matters too.
And I'll just add real quickly, we didn't talk much about this, Chris, but it shouldn't be taken for granted. There's a certain skill to how you work with your strategic partner. There's a day-to-day aspect to that. There's a strategic aspect to that. And that takes a lot of time and effort. And you can't just say, well, I know everything there is about some aspect of Salesforce, for instance. I hope they'll see me and find me and pay attention to me. You've got to, really work hard to gain their attention and to, prove on a daily basis that you really want to be a true partner in that relationship.
Yeah.
And I think these are firms that, Salesforce has 1,700 partners. I mean, standing out from 1,700 partners is not easy. And so you really got to be thoughtful about how you spend your calories if you're sub 5 million. Yep. But to me, it's, be great at one or two things, not good at a lot of things, despite sometimes that's what you're hearing from the ISV is, hey, and, embrace the whole stack, embrace this new thing that we got going, because that's where they need help. That may not be the right answer. I mean, you got to run your play and be great at it, not just good.
Speaking of companies that are great at something, can you think of this is from another attendee, can you think of a services company that has done a good job at that first row, the business values, but being mission driven, diversity, et cetera?
I mean, self-serving. I mean, I think that the team up at Traction, which is now about $100 million business, they've done a really, really good job at embracing virtual, distributed, Traction for Good has been a core part of what their values have been from the beginning. Level of diversity, on the leadership team across the organization. So, proud of that team and what they've done and how they've built that up. I'd say that one stands out. Jeff, I don't know if any come to mind in your world.
Well, I'm not going to try to kiss anybody's what, but I think you guys at Aperio did a pretty good job. And the proof point in that regard is, how the organization and the personality of that organization, sustained itself after the acquisition. There's a depth of value driven culture there that was able to survive and succeed within a new corporate entity. I know from my own personal experience back in the 90s when the company I was a part of got acquired, it wasn't nearly as successful and didn't necessarily survive as well as what you guys built under those circumstances. So having set that as kind of the standard, you obviously know what you're looking for as you're helping organizations build the next leaders in the marketplace, so that ultimately an exit may lead to an acquisition. You want to make sure that the value that's been created can be in fact sustained after that transaction.
Right. I appreciate that, Jeff.
I think we have probably maybe one or two more questions, depends how fast you guys are at answering this. This one is, can you be too focused?
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, if you're too focused on a technology that's too far ahead of the curve, too small a customer segment,
yep.
I think, you have to be thoughtful about how big's the TAM? And is it right in front of you, or is it like, I know we experimented with things at Aperio, we were just too far out there. Einstein Analytics is my example with Salesforce. They were like, you got to do Einstein. It's the next greatest thing since sliced bread. And it was too early. We put a lot of people behind it, and it was too small, like our subset of customers we were targeting. And it was too focused for that little practice area that we stood up. But I do think you got to really understand the TAM and how you're going to attack it.
Yeah. And now it's huge. So this one says, you mentioned that all or most of the companies you're talking with say that talent acquisition is their #1 challenge. And it's been a topic a lot in the news lately. What are some of the best companies doing differently to solve the problem or to creatively get around it?
Yeah, I'll start, Jeff, and your thoughts here too. But I think, to me, some of the best companies are thoughtful about, it's not just finding existing talent, but it's how they're going to grow new talent.
Right.
And models to try to scale that new talent fast. So, if you're going to poach from existing talent in an existing, like, I want to go find the best ServiceNow skills or Snowflake skills. Yeah, you can seed a business that way, but you have to sustain. Like, I think the best companies have a real plan for growing talent. And they're bringing in education, training, certification programs and processes very early in their life cycle. HR is not HR, they have a learning officer in a way early in the cycle. So I think some of the best companies are really thoughtful about investing in growing talent, not just attracting talent.
Yeah, and that talent becomes your recruitment tool. The early folks who come into your organization who have seen the company be true to its mission, be true to its desire to grow and give new experiences to its talent, they'll go out and tell their friends about it, and they'll be the ones who will be your #1 advocates going out and helping in the recruitment process.
I'm going to ask this question, then switch back over to the slide to close this out. But what stood out about Tercera's initial investments, and what were some lessons that you learned during those 2 initial processes?
Well, I think what stood out, the relationship with the ISV was very significant, and their willingness, the software companies, to co-invest was also very significant. And so but I'd say that was awesome. The CEOs, like, highly just engaged, really strong vision, coachable, want to partner, was important as well. And then I think their teams. It's people-based business, so their teams, like, when as it wasn't just the CEO, but like one click down. That really. So I'd say it's kind of the ISV relationship, 1, vision and coachability, 2, and then finally the overall team with the CEO, of course.
Great. Well, I think that brings us to about time. And so for the folks that we didn't get to answer your questions, I shot a couple of you a note to see if we could follow up separately. But if not, you can always get in touch with us at info@tercera.io. So maybe, Chris, I'll leave this with you on a couple ways folks can get engaged.
Yeah, I won't, without reading the slide. You can read it yourself, but certainly, would love to hear from you, depending on who you are, how you want to be helpful. We're really excited about, I like to say, services don't suck. We love services. We love great entrepreneurs, and we want to be helpful in taking both ISV ecosystems and helping kind of think through how they'll grow, but also the firms themselves. We want to partner, and these are not majority command and control, let's take over your company. This is minority investment. Let's scale and grow together. And so, if you fit, whether it's ISV support, a consultancy yourself, would love to partner. So feel free to reach out to me or to us, and look forward to the dialogue.
Great. Well, I think that wraps it up. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks for everybody who joined. Really appreciate it. Our first webinar in the books. So like I said, I will send around this recording in a couple days, and reach out if we can be helpful.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Thanks, everybody.